Would you rather have big government with sound money or small government with fiat money? And some think that's an oxymoron because if you had sound money, you can't have big government. But I would say big government is is part of the populace's desire, right? So even if you have sound money, if the populace wants the government to solve their problems, the majority of the populace does, guess what? The government's going to solve their problems and they'll take them off the sound money system. This is a survey or a question that George Gammon put out on his Twitter a week back or so. And it got me thinking ultimately, sound money is not a panacea. It's not something that will fix all the problems, although it does shrink the size of government to some degree because they have to live within their means. But um, we basically have a populace that maybe they've been conditioned. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think in the comments, but that desire for the government to solve our problems. The private sector doesn't need to do it. Government needs to do it. And I think that has all kinds of negative effects on the economy and on individuals, et cetera. But at the end of the day, government has to shrink in size. As government spending as a percent of GDP goes up, economy shrinks. Economic growth slows. Why? Because government spends and allocates money not efficiently. They're not incentivized to do it, so why would they? So one of the solutions to these problems that we're seeing is a flat tax. I want to show you guys this article here. Um, one of my beliefs is that everyone needs to have skin in the game. Some 40% of Americans don't pay federal income tax. So as you're voting to tax your neighbor, that doesn't affect you in the slightest. So you can essentially vote for your neighbor to give you money if they're wealthier than you. And I just think that that leads to negative consequences. So I do think some kind of flat tax would be good. Um, and I do prefer a tax on consumption, not necessarily an income tax. But Republicans are proposing this new national sales tax of 23%, and that's on top of state sales tax. But let's go through it, and you guys can let me know what you think. But I do think at the bare minimum, people need to have skin in the game. So if you're a voter, you should have to pay into the tax system. I know they pay Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid taxes, but if you can just vote to steal your neighbor's money, I don't think that's a good thing. So a group of House Republicans are revisiting the Fair Tax Act, which would replace certain federal levies to national sales tax and decentralize the IRS because essentially the states would impose this. Now, this doesn't have legs, I don't think. I don't think it's going to pass the Senate. But it's still something to chew on. Okay. I think a sales tax eventually actually will be necessary because it is getting harder and harder for the um, IRS to detect money, right? Like to so people are finding ways to get out of being taxed legally or illegally, and so it would be better to tax at the point of sale for the IRS in the long term, especially as digital currencies come out that the state doesn't control. Okay, so introduced in early January, the proposal would eliminate income payroll, estate, and gift tax and be replaced by a 23% national sales tax. So this would save the government money because they wouldn't need the IRS. And the proposal also aims to decentralize the IRS by slashing agency funding, relying on individual states to administer the levy. So 23%. Who do you think this would affect most? Obviously, it's fair. Some people don't think it's fair, but everyone's paying the same amount. If you consume more, then you spend more in taxes. And if you consume less, maybe this would. I think in the long run, this would disincentivize spending, which is a good thing to some degree, and maybe shrink the size of government because less tax receipts are coming in. But that's never stopped them before. They just take on more debt. The reintroduction of the Fair Tax Act comes amid increased scrutiny of the $79.6 billion IRS funding enacted during the Inflation Reduction Act in August. a sentence I thought I would never utter. More IRS funding for a act called the Inflation Reduction Act. We do live in peak clown world, folks. The money has been earmarked for priorities such as enforcement, tax services, technology upgrades, and more. While the Fair Tax Act isn't likely to gain traction in Congress, experts say the plan would be significant change for the middle income earners and the wealthiest Americans. Why did they say this? If it were enacted, middle income earners would see a pretty significant tax increase, and the wealthiest Americans would see the biggest cuts, according to John Boole, Senior Communication Manager at the Tax Policy Center. He said the plan would make the tax system more regressive despite the built in monthly rebates, because there are rebates for families below a certain income level, especially since the 23% rate is tax inclusive, which actually costs consumers about 30%. So, what that means is it's 23% of the total cost, which, so what they do, let's say you bought something for $100. They tack on, they so it's technically 30% because you're going to pay $130 for that item, but then they divide the $30 by the 130. That's how they get the 23. It's political math, which is not math at all. But I guess my question for you guys is how do you think a fair tax system, or what do you think a fair tax system would look like? Number one, I don't think you should be mandated to pay into things like Social Security. I think you should have the option. And that option means that you don't obviously get the benefit. But obviously, we live in a society, a shared society, and so we all get our say. But this is one of many suggestions. But ultimately, I think the best suggestion to fix this whole system is government spending needs to shrink down to below 5% of GDP. And so that means you either have to grow GDP or shrink government spending. Which one do you think is going to happen? I think neither. I think we're going to go on this road until pain happens, and then it'll wake up your average citizen. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.